What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. So how good does a speaker have to be for me to come back from my buddy's wedding rehearsal on a Friday night after having a 3-course meal at a fancy restaurant where I'm stuffed to the brim and decide I'm going to film a YouTube video at 1 o'clock in the morning on a Friday night when I've got a wedding to attend the next day? Let me tell you, the speaker has to be really, really good for me to be that excited about it, to be able to have the energy to sit down and film that review after being just on such a full stomach. Wow. Anyway, that speaker today is the Fritz Carbon 7 Special Edition Mark II, or is it the Mark II Special Edition? Nope, Special Edition Mark II. We got it right the first time. So we'll do this review the same way we generally do. I'll throw the main specs on screen so you guys can check that out. I'm going to tell you about some standout features, some areas where I think the speaker is unique and really, really excels. And guys, stay with me. You do not want to sleep on this one. If you've got $3,000 or less to spend on a speaker, hell, if you've got $4,000 or less to spend on a speaker, this speaker deserves your attention for quite a few reasons. So some standout features. First and foremost, this is going to be a little bit on the larger side for a bookshelf speaker. I wouldn't call it a large one, but if something like the Bucard S400 to Dynaudio Special 40 is considered normal size bookshelf speaker, this is going to be quite a bit bigger than both of those. Another standout feature is going to be the fact that this can come in a myriad of custom wood veneer finishes. Fritz speakers are made by one guy. That one guy chooses the driver complement, chooses the veneer for the wood. Well, actually, you would choose the veneer for the wood. He applies it. He builds the cabinets. It's all made in the United States of America. And boy, does he do a good job. Drivers. We've got a lot of dollars worth of drivers in these speakers now. I'm not a expert when it comes to bringing a product to market. However, generally, I would say in a speaker, under $3,000 for the pair, it wouldn't be crazy to see a driver that's in the neighborhood of maybe $50, $80, $90 per driver. These drivers in these speakers, these are over $200 a piece. Once you include the tweeters, you're looking at about $600 just in drive components. Guys, that might not sound like a lot for a speaker that sells for $2,800. Listen, that is a lot. That is possibly one of the most expensive drivers you'll find in a bookshelf speaker in and around this price. And just to really, paint that picture for you clearly, this driver, or I should say a version of this driver, is used in speakers costing in excess of $18,000. So it is pretty darn good. The crossover is an interesting design. Some of you guys that are a lot smarter than me might want to hop over to Fritz's website and read about this crossover. I talked to Fritz about it. I did some reading on it, but I'm going to give it to you in layman's terms. I don't want to get too technical. The design philosophy for this crossover is as few parts as possible in the signal path. And what that is a few things. One is it makes a speaker that is very, very easy to drive. This speaker is 8 ohms. The minimum impedance is just 6 ohms, and that's only at 200 hertz, which is a very, very easy load on virtually any amplifier. Guys, I was able to use these speakers with this tiny little amp. This is the Wrecker amp. This is only 2 watts per channel. That is not a lot of power, and it drove these speakers just fine. I drove a lot of speakers with this little Wrecker 2-watt amp, actually, because I'm going to be reviewing it soon. And the Fritz Carbon 7 SE Mark IIs, they were able to play the loudest and sound the fullest with just a measly 2 watts. Now, of course, I also used my Kinky Studio mono blocks, which belt out 250 watts RMS at 8 ohms per channel. And the Fritz Carrera Carbon 7 Special Edition Mark II. Sorry, guys, long names. Oh, it's a little bit hard to keep track of. We're just going to call them Carbon 7s going forward. But the Fritz Carbon 7s handled, my Kinky mono blocks, no freaking problem. Some other standout features, it's a 7-inch driver. Usually we see about 6.5 in and around this price point. But at the end of the day, what you're getting here from Fritz is a bespoke product. This is essentially a custom speaker. It's made in small batches for the customer. When they order, it's unlikely that you can call him today, say, I want a speaker, and he's going to ship it to you tomorrow. He's most likely going to build it first. And that is just super cool to see at this price point. So, but what does it sound like, right? What does it sound like? Is it any good? Yeah, it is really good. We're going to do some comparisons too, guys. Don't you worry. But let me tell you what it sounds like. This is a speaker that is all about clarity, openness, and separation. Now, some of you might have heard that word clarity and thought I'm saying this is an analytical speaker, maybe a lot like Focal. No, sir, that is not the case. This speaker, when I talk about clarity, I'm talking about a clarity in the mid-range section. A lot of speakers have a ton of clarity in the top end treble region. You know, KEF LS50 Meta is a great example. At $1,600, you get a ton of clarity and treble separation in that top end. It's not what I'm talking about. That on its own, not too impressive, because again, many speakers do that. The Fritz Carbon 7 give you a clarity in the mid-range I've not heard at this price point. I really haven't. I'd say the Mon Acoustic Supermon Mini, they had just absolutely impeccable mid-range. I really don't include those when I'm thinking about this though, because that is a speaker that is just so niche, being so small. But I'll leave you with this. If those of you guys who watched my Supermon Mini review, that $2,000 tiny little billet aluminum speaker that came from Korea, I said it was the best mid-range I had ever heard. I said it competed or beat my Focal Canta #1s in a lot of ways. I could say the same thing about the Fritz Carbon 7s. This is a mid-range centric speaker, and what you get in that mid-range is just so freaking good. I mean, how good is it? Look, I'd never start with the mid-range first. Usually I tell you about the treble, then I tell you about the mid-range, and sometimes I'll say not a lot was going on in the mid-range, so I'll just move on to the bass, because most speakers don't have a lot going on in the mid-range. They're mostly neutral. Sometimes they're a little bit warm, but not the Fritz Carbon 7. They are spacious, and the separation is, I don't know how else to explain this to you guys, but paired up with something like the Thomason Stereo Galleon amp, which is, you know, a tube amplifier that is going to aid in that clarity, aid in that separation even further. I was greeted with a combination of speaker and amplifier that I'm not sure can be beat for the same amount of money. I'm just not sure. I think this is a speaker that really punches above its weight. I think this is a speaker that's going on my short list for possible product of the year at the end of this year. Really, really, really surprised here. Really surprised. Let's start with the treble though, and let me take you through it without getting too carried away. So the treble, look, it's open, it's clear. It never came across harsh. I wouldn't call it bright and very energetic. I wouldn't call it recessed dark or anything like that. It's mostly even keeled, fairly neutral, if anything, just a little bit on the forward side, just enough to give you a nice sense of clarity, a good sense of realism, nice imaging and detail retrieval and things like that. Top notch, no complaints. Again, moving down to the mid-range, I already talked about a lot of this stuff, but you're talking about just this absolute effortlessness in its clarity, in its separation, in its imaging, in its staging, whether it be vertical staging, horizontal staging, or depth, just absolutely phenomenally staged, huge, and with immaculate spatial cues, separations, and even oftentimes a sense of distance that, again, I generally don't find in and around this price category. Moving down to the bass, there's no mid-bass bump. I'm happy about that. I don't like it when a speaker is artificially boosted in the mid-bass region. Oftentimes that makes the speaker sound boxy, fake, or cheap just to my ears. I know some people like that. I'm not that kind of customer personally. The bass was very linear, very quick, very articulate, very good note-to-note distinction, very good leading edges, transients, clarity, fidelity overall, very good. Essentially what I'm saying here from top to bottom, treble, mid-range, bass, we have a truly high fidelity speaker in the truest sense of the word. It does everything very, very well. And again, it is going to be what I would consider a mid-range centric design. That's where you're going to really like notice its magic, what it could do, right? Like the Buchard S400 is a super powerful bass speaker. When we listen to it, bass is that thing where we're like, whoa, wow, we're kind of impressed, right? Something like a Focal Canta #1 with that beryllium tweeter, its treble is what catches our attention, where we're like, whoa, wow, I'm impressed. With the Fritz Carbon 7, it's that mid-range, and it is so freaking good. I've heard other reviewers say something like, if a speaker company can get the mid-range right, then they've just got a good speaker. It's just that simple. And if you can't get the mid-range right, you've got a terrible speaker. And let me tell you, Fritz got the mid-range absolutely right. It is so good. I tried it with a ton of different amplifiers. I already told you I used the Wrecker 2 watt per channel amplifier, and it was just fine. Now, I wouldn't recommend that unless you have a very small room or sit very close. It was able to drive the Fritz speakers just fine, but I don't see really any reason to use something that's just 2 watts a channel unless it's a desktop rig, and I think these speakers are just a little bit too big to be used in a desktop scenario. You could use that wrecker amp in a monoblock mode with a pair, but then at that point you might as well just step up and get their next model, which is called the Gallahorn. Anyhow, I digress. Enough of that about that brand. We haven't reviewed them yet. Thomas & Stereo's Galleon was wow. Like I said, that was a combination of amplifier and speaker. I don't think can be bested for the money. If you're lucky enough to already own the Thomas & Stereo Galleon TS120, and you haven't purchased speakers yet that are going to be your end game setup, I highly suggest you check out the Fritz Carbon 7s. I really do. It was just such a winning combination. Of course, I tried the Hagel H190 that I have here. I almost said SC. Everything's SC. The Thomas & Stereo Galleon is TS120 SC. This is the Carbon 7 SC Mark II. So many special editions. Too many special editions sometimes. The Hagel H190, though, excellent pairing. Hagel amplifier, I haven't reviewed it yet, and I'm going to soon. It's a very, very good amplifier. The magical thing about Hagel is it really gets out of the way. So everything I told you about how the speaker sounds, Hagel just amplifies that for you. Hagel's not here to add a lot of flavor. Hagel's not here to richen up or cool off things. It amplifies the music in a way that's very agreeable. That was a very good pairing. My Kinky Studio preamp and monoblocks, excellent pairing, no complaints. I really like that. That's how I listen to them most of the time, just because that's my reference setup. Even though I enjoyed them most with the Galleon TS120 SC. And then, of course, I did try the Emotiva TA2. That's Emotiva's $1,000 budget integrated amplifier. That's got a ton of features. The Fritz Carbon 7, this is what it comes down to for me. It's not picky with amplifiers. I'll go as far as to say, I don't care what amplifiers you have. The Fritz Carbon 7 is probably going to sound just fine on just about any amplifier. Its voicing is such that if you've got a warm amp, it's going to complement it. If you've got an amp that leans cool, analytical, and neutral, it's going to complement it. It's going to sound good with any amp. And whether you've got a little bit of power or a ton of power, the speakers are really easy load on your amplifier. So it doesn't even matter how much power you have realistically. I'd say if you've got an honest 10 watts a channel or more, you're in great shape for these speakers. And probably, I'll be honest, 5 watts. 5 watts a channel might be just fine. In fact, Fritz's literature suggests 5 to 200 watts RMS for the speaker, which is a very wide range, and I absolutely believe it. So, I've told you what it sounds like. I've told you what amplifier pairings I've used. Let's compare it to some other speakers to help give some context to these things I've told you so far. So, oh, by the way, I never say this crap, but if you like what you see, hit the like button, helps out the channel, and all that happy crap. If you like the content, subscribe or don't. It doesn't really matter to me a whole lot, but I got to say that because sometimes we forget when we're watching content to do those things. I forget a lot of times. I hear other YouTubers say that. I watch a ton of video game reviews, and those fools be like, don't forget to hit subscribe, don't forget to hit like. They say it a lot. And oftentimes I'm like, oh, I did forget to hit like, and I have been enjoying this video, so I go ahead and click it. Anyway, back to the review. Comparisons. Let's start with the Buchart S400 Mark II, my favorite speaker, period. Everyone knows this about me. I love the Buchart S400 Mark II. It's my daily driver. I'm a huge fan of Buchart audio speakers. It is the sound signature I like. I love it. I don't love that the price has been creeping up recently. Those speakers were originally in the neighborhood of $1,800, $1,900, depending on the exchange rate. Now they're sitting closer to $21. That puts the Fritz Carbon 7s $700 north of the Buchart S400 Mark IIs. As much as I love the Buchart S400 Mark II, it cannot compete with the Fritz Carbon 7. It can't. Not really anywhere except bass quantity. The treble on the Fritz Carbon 7s, it's better. It's a little bit different. It's a little bit more natural sounding, but it is just, overall, it's better. The mid-range on the Fritz Carbon 7 is going to be much more open, much more expansive, much more clear, a better sense of separation everywhere. It is voiced differently, however. The Buchart S400 Mark II is going to be more on the warm side of things. And the Fritz Carbon 7 is more going to have that natural sound. And there's some liveliness in the mid-range, right? So they're voiced differently. So, taste could be a factor. But if we're just talking about the sound quality, mid-range on up, the Fritz Carbon 7 is the better speaker. Moving down to the bass, If you value bass quantity, then the Bucard S400 Mark II is the better speaker. If you're looking for bass fidelity, transients, quickness, note-to-note distinction, leading edges, handling of delicate passages, so on and so forth, the Fritz Carbon 7 is the better speaker in the bass region. It cannot match the Bucard S400 Mark II in terms of bass quantity and bass power. The Fritz Carbon 7 does have a good amount of bass of its own. I was expecting just a smidgen more given the size of the cabinet. And I was actually surprised instead to get bass that was more linear and instead very controlled, very well articulated, and so on. Let's go up in price though, because these are more expensive than the Bucard S400 Mark IIs. So maybe it's no surprise really that I found them to be better in a lot of categories. Let's talk about the Dynaudio Special 40. That's a speaker that I believe sells for about $3,500 or $3,600. So it's a little bit more expensive than the Fritz Carbon 7s. Again, the sound is going to be a little bit different with the Dynaudio Special 40 being a little bit more romantic in the mid-range. It definitely has boosted bass down low, and its clarity is an interesting combination of a little bit energetic and bright in a lot of ways, but with soft attack. The Fritz Carbon 7 and the Dynaudio Special 40 treble, both are really, really good, and as is Bucard's treble. I really like Bucard's treble a lot. Fritz gives you a sense of spaciousness to it, though, that the other brands just didn't for me. So I'm going to go ahead and say Fritz takes the edge in terms of its treble. Some may like that Dynaudio Special 40 treble because, again, it is unique in the sense that it's energetic and elevated, but its attack isn't sharp. It's a little bit soft, so it's fairly easy on the ears despite being fairly energetic. And that actually leads to a lot of people calling it a darker speaker when it's not. It actually is on the forward side of neutral, but its attack is a little bit soft, so it's so easy on the ears. A lot of people don't notice it's actually bright. Anyhow, I digress. I'd say treble's a toss-up. It's going to come down to personal taste, maybe. Let's talk about the mid-range. Dynaudio Special 40 cannot compete with Fritz in terms of mid-range openness, expansiveness, sense of scale, depth, width, height, just anything dimensionality-wise, instrument separation, a sense of realism. The Fritz Carbon 7 is, its mid-range just is a lot better. Moving down to bass, it's going to be a lot like the S400 comparison. If you value bass quantity, you may prefer the Dynaudio Special 40. It's a bass monster. It's got a ton of bass. If you instead prefer to have the best in bass fidelity, nuance, detail, handling of delicate passages, note-to-note distinction, so on and so forth, then you're going to prefer the Fritz Carbon 7s. And look, when I say the Fritz Carbon 7s have better bass fidelity and quality than the Dynaudio Special 40 or the Bucard S400 Mark II, I'm not saying those speakers have terrible bass fidelity. That's not the case. Their bass fidelity is very good and very respectable for their price categories. What's happening with Fritz essentially is Fritz is punching above its weight by quite a bit. Of course, I have not heard all the speakers in and around $3,000, but I've heard quite a few speakers in and around this price point, and the Fritz just really seems to punch above its weight. There's the Sonus Faber Soneto 2s. We can kind of use that as a comparison. Actually, those are very similarly priced. The Fritz is $2,800. The Sonus Faber Soneto 2s are $2,500. There's a $300 difference. The Sonus Faber Soneto 2, the treble is good. It's good. It's open. It's clear. It's got good detail. The Fritz just does it all better in the treble region. Moving down to the mid-range, I felt the Sonus Faber mid-range was good. Maybe if you listen to a lot of like jazz and things like that, which I don't, but it was a little bit tonally rich. It had some flavor to it. And I think if that's your taste, you're going to like that. The Fritz Carbon 7 was a lot more natural sounding, a lot more open. Again, a lot more just dimension, space, sense of scale, and so on. Moving down to the bass, the Sonus Faber Soneto 2, I found the bass to be a little bit sloppy, honestly. I didn't love it. Its quality wasn't all that good. It was very strong and powerful, but I felt at $2,500, the Sonus Faber Soneto 2's bass just didn't deliver the fidelity it needed to compete in that $2,500 price category. And the Fritz Carbon 7's bass is simply superior just from top to bottom versus something like the Sonus Faber Soneto 2. So I have told you, I've showed you the speaker specs. I've told you what it sounds like. I've told you standout features. I've told you about amplifier pairings I've used. I've compared it to other speakers in and around this price category. I'm not sure there's much else I can tell you. The only con I can possibly think of is if you're someone who is like, I want to know that I've got just this ironclad, rock solid warranty when I buy something. Well, Fritz is again, it's a bespoke product. You're buying from one man. God forbid he gets hit by a car or something like that after you buy the speakers. There's no one to warranty your speakers. However, I will say that's a moot point because speakers are fairly simple products in terms of the amount of parts they have. You've got a driver, you've got another driver here, you got a cabinet, then you've got a crossover, which on this model is very, very simplified. It's built with very high quality parts. I don't imagine something like this would need service for quite some time. And if there was some kind of failure caused by maybe a customer error, maybe you turned your amplifier on and didn't realize the volume was turned up all the way or something like that. I saw that happen recently to someone on the forums, and he damaged them. These drivers, this tweeter, these parts are readily available. You can hop online and buy them yourself. So I don't think that's something anyone has to really worry about. It's a solid product. I don't think it's going to need service. And if it does, and Fritz isn't around for some reason, maybe he got struck by lightning, right? This is really easily serviceable by just about anyone. And if it's the crossover, any engineer can take care of that, change a cap if needed. But I don't think the crossover actually has any caps. I think that's the whole point. Anyway, I digress. Look, this is a potential product of the year without a doubt. The Fritz Carbon 7 impressed a lot, tremendously so. If you got any questions, ask in the comments section below. This YouTube channel does have a free Discord. Feel free to hop in there. If you do hop in the free Discord, please don't be an asshole. We don't appreciate that. We do have moderators there, and we will not hesitate to block you. We don't care. We really don't. We've got over 1,000 people in there, and we want it to be a good time for everyone. So if you're toxic, just don't even join, right? If anything I've said in this video hurts your feelings, I would like to just remind you, take that shit somewhere else. I don't care. I don't care. It's not my job to validate how you feel, what you think, so on and so forth. In fact, I'll go as far as to say if you're the emotionally sensitive type, perhaps just leave a thumbs down and fuck off. You're probably not going to enjoy my content anyway. I don't cater to emotionally needy people, especially men. Kind of weird, right? Anyway, I digress. Absolutely amazing speaker. Hats off to Fritz. My understanding is the man has been building speakers for, I don't know, I think 30 or 40 years. His experience, his years, his decades of knowledge have brought us this. And it's fantastic. If you're in the market for a speaker, I'd say $4,000 or less. You owe it to yourself to check out a pair of Carbon 7s, especially if you value a speaker with a special mid-range presentation that just seems to beat everything else in its price category, right? Or if maybe you just want like a custom finish, as you can see the ones on the screen behind me, they've got a different finish than the ones down here. They're all real wood veneers. And look, I'm rambling. I've told you everything I want to tell you. Leave your comment below, hop in the free Discord, have a beautiful day. Until next time, later.